Welcome to Music History Monday for August 5th, 2024. I'm Bob Greenberg, and the title for today's podcast is The First Professional Composer. If you haven't already, please consider joining me on my subscription site at patreon.com/RobertGreenbergMusic, where I blog, vlog, podcast, pontificate, review, and bloviate 4 to 6 times a week. Easy times. We've been having a good time, an easy time here at Music History Monday these last few weeks. 5 of our last 6 Music History Monday posts have featured fairly recent musical events from the popular side of the musical aisle. Music History Monday for June 24th focused on disco. On July 1st, the invention and marketing of Sony's Walkman. On July 8th, the American crooner Steve Lawrence, who was born, as I know you recall, Sidney Leibowitz. On July 22nd, Taylor Swift. And on July 29th, Cass Elliot, born Ellen Naomi Cohen. Today, we get back to the historical repertoire. But let me assure you, the composer we will focus on was as groundbreaking as Sony's Walkman. His music is gorgeous as the silken voices of Steve Lawrence and Cass Elliot. His rhythmic sensibilities as sharply honed as those of the Bee Gees and Taylor Swift, though to my knowledge, a concert of his music never simulated a magnitude 2.3 earthquake in downtown Seattle, as did Ms. Swift's on July 22, 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Guillaume Du Fay. We celebrate the birth on August 5th, 1397, 627 years ago today, of the composer Guillaume Du Fay. He was, by every standard, one of the greatest composers to have ever lived, and was admired as such in his own lifetime. Guillaume Du Fay as the first professional composer. Writing in the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, the Venezuelan-American musicologist, conductor, and composer Alejandro Enrique Planchart observed that, quote, before Du Fay's time, the concept of a composer, that is, a musician whose primary occupation is composition, and not a priest, choir master, or teacher, was largely unfamiliar in Europe. The emergence of musicians who focused on composition above other musical endeavors arose in the 15th century and was exemplified by Du Fay. Unquote. Early life. He was born in the Flemish, today Belgian, town of Beersel, just south of Brussels. He died 77 years later, on November 27, 1474, just across the border in northern France, in the city of Cambrai. Du Fay is a principal member of the fraternity of Franco-Flemish, that is, French-Belgian composers, that dominated European music in the 15th and early 16th centuries. That fraternity featured some pretty heavy compositional hitters, including Jacob Albrecht, Heinrich Eyck, Orlando de Lassus, Johannes Ockeghem, and the uber-great Josquin des Prez. With the exception of Ockeghem, all these gentlemen spent a significant portion of their careers in Italy, where the climate was swell and the pay was sweet. The Italians called them the Oltremontani, literally, the dudes from the other side of the Alps. We don't know much about Du Fay's very early life. We do know that he was the illegitimate child of an unmarried woman named Marie Du Fay, spelled F-A-Y-T, and an unknown priest. And while the temptation, of course, is great, we shall resist comment on that informational tidbit. We know that early on, Marie Du Fay moved to Cambrai in northern France, where she had family and where her son, Guillaume, or William, was educated at the magnificent Gothic Cathedral of Cambrai, where he served as a choir boy. Du Fay's musical star burned bright. In 1428, at the age of 31, now a singer and composer of considerable renown who had already held some pretty high musical positions in Italy, he joined the papal choir in Rome. Said to have been founded by Pope Gregory the Great himself, who reigned as Pope from 1590 to 604, and for whom Gregorian chant is named. The papal choir was simply the single greatest musical organization in the world at that time, the choral equivalent of the 1927 Yankees, the 1972 Miami Dolphins, and the 2017 Golden State Warriors. Parenthetically, I'd tell you that the choir has officially resided in the Sistine Chapel since the chapel was consecrated on August 15th, 1483. As such, the papal choir is known today as the Sistine Chapel Choir. Its complete official name is the Coro della Cappella Musicale Pontificia Sistina, the Pope's Chorus of the Sistine Chapel, meaning the Pope's personal choir. The choir performs at papal functions in the Sistine Chapel, as well as any other church in Rome in which the Pope is officiating, including St. Peter's Basilica. For a Catholic-born singer and composer, there was no more prestigious position anywhere in Europe than the papal choir. Nevertheless, Du Fay was as ambitious and charming as he was talented, and having moved to Rome, he made friends in the highest places. Among his closest friends was a wealthy Venice-born cardinal named Gabriele Condulmer, 1383 to 1447. Du Fay chose his friends wisely, because in 1431, Cardinal Condulmer became Pope Eugenio IV. Eugenio IV was the second post-schism pope to rule over a presumably reunited church. For our information, the so-called Western Schism, which had run from 1378 to 1417, was a period of religious upheaval that saw two and sometimes even three men simultaneously claim to be the one true pope, each one excommunicating the others. Unfortunately, the end of the schism and the reestablishment of a single pope residing in Rome did not mean that the issues that had led to the schism in the first place had just gone away. In 1434, just 3 years after Pope Eugenio IV began his reign, yet another religious rebellion in Rome forced the Pope and his establishment, including the papal choir, to vacate Rome and head north, where they set up shop in Florence. For Guillaume Du Fay, the timing of the papacy's move to Florence could not have been more fortuitous. Florence was at the very height of its wealth and power, and in 1436, Florence's great cathedral, under reconstruction since the 1290s, was ready to be rededicated. On March 25th, 1436, the Feast of the Annunciation and the Florentine New Year's Day, Florence's distinguished guest, Pope Eugenio IV, conducted the consecration ceremony himself. The cathedral, to that time known as Santa Reparata, was renamed Santa Maria del Fiore, or Saint Mary of the Flowers, in honor of the Virgin Mary. To mark the occasion, the Pope commissioned Guillaume Du Fay to compose a major work to commemorate the consecration. Du Fay found his inspiration for the commissioned work in the groundbreaking and newly completed dome above the cathedral. Brunelleschi's dome. The Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore is crowned by a cupola, or a dome, that is one of the great wonders of human ingenuity. Designed and built by Filippo Brunelleschi, 1377 to 1446, between 1419 and 1436, the dome had to be self-supporting because there was nowhere to put external buttresses to hold it up from the outside. Brunelleschi's solution was to build an elongated double dome, with the outer dome resting on an inner shell. The structural integrity of both domes was guaranteed by laying successive horizontal rings of bricks in a herringbone pattern, interspersed by a double helix or double loxodrome of vertical bricks, altogether over 4 million bricks in all. For our information, this structural miracle, which allowed the dome to be constructed without any external scaffolding or support, was only discovered in 2020 after extensive computer analysis. The outer dome is divided into 8 segments by vertical ribs, which themselves are held in place on top by a huge white marble lantern topped with a copper orb. Inspired to his cockles by Brunelleschi's constructive wizardry, Du Fay composed, though a better word might be constructed, a dedicatory motet, a polyphonic vocal work that may or may not be accompanied by instruments. Du Fay's motet, in its musical construction and religious symbolism, is as ingenious and, as a musical composition, as complicated as Brunelleschi's dome itself. Despite being a relatively early composition, Du Fay's motet, entitled Nuper Rosarum Flores, meaning recent rose blossoms, remains his single most famous work. The title, Recent Rose Blossoms, refers directly to the name of the newly constructed cathedral, St. Mary of the Flowers. The motet freely mixes the compositional old with the new, combining an old compositional technique drawn from the 14th century with the new 15th century concepts of harmonic consonance and dissonance, and the triad as the basic unit of harmony. Isorhythm. Now please, bear with me for a moment. The old compositional technique, the 14th century technique that Du Fay employs in Recent Rose Blossoms, is called isorhythm. An isorhythmic work is one in which one or more of its melodic parts features a sequence of rhythms that is repeated over and over again. In such a part, the pitches of the melody will change, but the rhythmic sequence, the underlying rhythmic pattern, remains the same. Such an isorhythmic melody line is called a talia. The plural is taliae. Now, as listeners, we are not expected to consciously follow the underlying and repeated rhythmic sequence of an isorhythmic part. Rather, isorhythm was considered a metaphor for the grace and order of God that invisibly lies behind all things. Are you still with me? Okay, Recent Rose Blossoms, is scored for 4 parts, 2 tenor voices, both of which are, for all intents and purposes, isorhythmic, and 2 upper voices that are freely composed. The piece features 2 separate texts sung simultaneously. The tenor voices intone a plaint chant, a so-called Gregorian chant, associated with the consecration of churches. Terribilis est locus iste, meaning awesome is this place. At the same time, the 2 upper voices sing a text or poem probably written by Du Fay himself, celebrating both Pope Eugenio and the consecration of Santa Maria del Fiore. Again, the tenor parts, the parts that sing the plain chant, are isorhythmic, though admittedly with freedoms taken that would not have been taken back in the 14th century. The talia, the repeated sequence of rhythms heard in the tenor parts, is heard a total of 4 times. However, Du Fay does not repeat the talia exactly each time, but rather alters the duration of the rhythmic values of each repetition relative to the others, creating a ratio of 6:4 to 2:3. For example, the first note in the first version of the talia, of the rhythmic pattern, is sustained for 12 beats. The first note in the second version of the talia is sustained for 8 beats. The first note in the third version of the talia is sustained for 4 beats, and the first note of the fourth talia for 6 beats, creating between the taliae a 6:4 to 2:3 ratio. This 6:4 to 2:3 structural ratio portrays, according to biblical tradition, the proportions of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. According to the second book of Kings, Solomon's temple was 60 cubits in length, a cubit measuring about 18 inches. The inner sanctum, or nave, was 40 cubits from the temple's doors, 20 cubits in width, and 30 cubits in height. These are exactly the durational proportions of Du Fay's taliae, 6:4 to 2:3, proportions that became a template for every consecrated church in Christendom, including Florence's magnificent Santa Maria del Fiore. But wait! When it comes to Du Fay's numerical symbolism, there's more. We also read in Kings that the dedication feasts of the Temple of Solomon lasted for 7 days and 7 days, that is, 14 days. Just so, each of Du Fay's 4 taliae contained 14 pitches, divided between the 2 tenors as 7 plus 7. The number 7 also relates directly to the 7 pillars of Solomon's temple, the 7-fold gifts of the Holy Spirit, gifts that would have filled the temple at its dedication, and the 7 censings, meaning the 7 blessings of the altar with incense during the dedication service. But wait, there's still more. In Christian symbolism, the number 7 represents the Virgin's 7-fold attributes: 7 sorrows, 7 joys, 7 acts of mercy, 7 virginal companions, and so forth. As far as Du Fay's numerical symbolism goes, we'll stop here, with the understanding that 1, we've only scratched the surface of possible symbolic numerical meanings in the motet, and 2, that we haven't even talked about the upper 2 voices and the separate celebratory text that they simultaneously sing. I'll ask the question many of you are thinking. Why should any of this technical stuff regarding the isorhythmic taliae and the numerical symbolism matter Isn't the important thing how the music sounds and how it makes us feel? It matters because it mattered to Du Fay. He was a 15th century composer who, like an architect, was expected to design his music. In Du Fay's day, structural proportions were an essential and intrinsic element of musical expression, especially in sacred music, in that the structure reflected God's own perfection. Gloriously beautiful though it is, one of the reasons why Du Fay's music is rarely heard today is because it doesn't seem to resonate with our modern fetish for emotional expression. But as a sacred work composed in 1436, Nuper Rosarum Flores is deeply expressive. It is based on the Word of God by employing pitch sequences drawn from a plain chant, and its structure expresses God's omnipresent excellence. For educated listeners in 1436, that was as musically expressive as it got. For your viewing and listening pleasure, a wonderful performance of Du Fay's Nuper Rosarum Flores is linked. Sung by the Choir Cleveland and conducted by Ross W. Duffin, it was recorded at the Mary Queen of Peace Church in Cleveland, Ohio, on September 27, 2014. We will, most appropriately, return to Master Guillaume Du Fay in tomorrow's Dr. Bob Prescribes post. We need to pick his biography back up and, of course, give his superb music a more complete look and listen to than the cursory glance we've just given it. In the meantime, we wish Du Fay the happiest of 627th birthdays. Frankly, the dude doesn't look a day over 626. Thank you. To sample and download one or all of my many courses on subjects musical produced by the Great Courses/The Teaching Company, please visit my website at robertgreenbergmusic.com.